It was quite quick. If you'd asked me at the beginning of the year, would I consider Islam as a religion, I would probably have said, well, you must be kidding.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين.
I was born Edward Wadsworth, but when I became Muslim, I took the name Abdul Jabar. People have asked me why Abdul Jabar, why not something that sounds closer to my birth name? Simply because somebody suggested to me when I reverted to actually take that name. I asked them, well, what does the name mean? And they said to me, one day you will find out. And so I just took that particular name, and it wasn't until further down the track that I did some research into it. And I thought, oh, okay, I don't quite see myself as that, but I think all things said and done now, where I am now, I can see what this brother was saying. Unfortunately, of course, this brother is no longer with us. I was born in Dunedin. My mother was Jehovah's Witness, and my father was Catholic. My mother and father divorced when I was about 1, and so she moved to Christchurch. So essentially I was raised as a Jehovah's Witness. I don't regret that, because being raised in that environment taught me good principles. It taught me to respect my elders. It taught me to respect authority. So I don't regret having been brought up in that environment. So I did have a very strong environment in Christianity, though one of the intriguing parts of that is the belief structure of Jehovah's Witnesses is actually not so different from Islam in the basics when it comes to celebration of festivals. They are always looked upon as pagan, whether it be Christmas, Easter, all of those sorts of things. They believe in one God, so I was always taught that principle of one God. I lost a couple of people in the Paris attacks in 2015, so that started my journey to learn more about Islam, because I was working for the Ministry of Social Development at the time. So there were people who came in that were Muslim, and I thought to myself, well, these people are nothing like how they're being described. I don't believe everything I watch on television. Therefore, I thought if I learn more about who Muslims are, maybe I'll be able to understand what is happening in the world environment. So it led me to go basically to the library. I thought, let's have a look at the Quran and see, what does the Quran say? What is it teaching? So I would essentially get up at like 5 o'clock every morning. I would read for about an hour the Quran from cover to cover. Then I would take down some notes, some questions, so that by the end of it, I could then perhaps talk to somebody at the mosque and ask them these questions, and maybe have any possible just clarification in my mind as to, what does Islam teach? What are Muslims? Is there a difference with what's happening around the world? Again, what does Islam teach about this? And that's what really took me on that path. So when I when it came to that time, I sent an email to the mosque, and I asked them, I said, I understood they probably get 100 emails a day, some probably not very creditable, but I am interested, I do have some questions, I'm quite genuine about this. Is there a chance of actually talking to somebody? And I got an email maybe about 10 minutes later from a brother who said, well, he happened to be at the masjid, did I want to meet him there? He told me we had a time, so I dutifully went along. And probably maybe after about maybe 10 minutes, I sort of felt like we'd sort of done enough talking. Something inside me was saying, well, maybe I found what I've been looking for. Not just the answers to the questions, but there were certain things in my own upbringing that I always had questions about, but it seemed like even those questions were answered. So really, it all came about that way. Yeah. Whew, possibly maybe 4 months. It was quite quick. If you'd asked me at the beginning of the year, would I consider Islam as a religion, I would probably have said, well, you must be kidding. But it's like that expression, going into a place one person and coming out somebody completely different. There was a complete change in my mind. From that time, I guess I just didn't really sort of feel, I certainly have no regrets of making that choice. Sometimes, we have inner doubts based on, things that happen around us. But outside of that, I would never change that path. Oh, that's a good question. Okay. After I left the mosque, after taking Shahada, I sent an email to my family and told them. Now, my mother's family are very, shall we say, Dutch. So I got summoned to a family meeting. And at that family meeting, I was told, I was asked why. Why did I choose to become Muslim? Did I know that this was terribly wrong? Did I know that basically every possible stereotype that has been said about Muslims through the years all came out at that meeting? And there was really nothing, there were no questions, there was a lot of statements. And I can't answer a statement. So I just stood there and said, well, yes, this is the decision I've made. And they said, well, essentially, if you continue with this, that will be it. That's it. That's the end of the line. You won't be spoken to by any of the family. Anyone who it was basically, it was a case of I had a choice. I either continued as things were, or I would be essentially disinherited, disenfranchised, every possible dis under the sun. So I thought, well, I'm an adult. I've always worked for myself. I've never relied on family money or family wealth. Therefore, it's not going to make any big difference in my life. So I'd made my choice. So it was a case of I just had to say to my family, look, I've made this choice. I'm not going to go back on it. It's still cut unless they want something. If my mother, for instance, wants something, then she will ring. A friend of mine wrote a book after the tragedy, and I gave it to my mother to read, which she did. And then my stepfather said to me, well, this doesn't change anything, don't you? And I smiled and said, well, that wasn't the point of reading the book. You can only just be kind, courteous and polite and respect them, respect their wishes even. It's all you can do, and hope that maybe one day the frost might thaw. Well, I guess it's something I had thought about, actually probably over the last couple of years. The question, what is it like to be Kiwi and Muslim? Or especially, I mean, we say Kiwi, I mean Pākehā Kiwi. What is it like? Well, what ends up happening is you're not Pākehā enough then suddenly for your Pākehā friends, but you're kind of not, for use of a better word, ethnic enough for the ethnic side. So you're kind of caught in this middle place. And it's an unusual place to be. It is a very unusual place to be. It's not a bad thing, but it's just something that you feel. And it's something that sometimes some people can make you feel. For instance, when March the 15th occurred, there was myself and quite a number of other brothers and sisters who had sort of come together to try to link central government, local government, all of those sorts of things to sort of create make things simpler, to make things a lot easier. But what sort of ended up happening was, as a Pākehā, you were kind of looked at like, well, who are you? Like, well, you can't be Muslim, you're white. And it's sort of, there's this stigma attached to it, that Muslims are not multicultural, which is completely false. We're incredibly multicultural. If you go to the masjid here in Christchurch, there's well over 30-something different ethnicities. That's a large number of people from all over the world. In terms of conflict, I don't think, being a Kiwi and being a Muslim, the two don't conflict with each other. New Zealand has always been a very good place to live. That's why a lot of people want to live here, because we do have certain freedoms, but there is nothing stopping us or preventing us from worshipping at the mosque. There is nothing to prevent us from being Muslim. Therefore, I don't believe there is a massive conflict between being a Kiwi and being Muslim. Maybe some of the more liberal viewpoints that have permeated society can come into conflict, especially as a revert. You sometimes can be a little liberal about certain behaviours or certain ways of life. But Islamic teaching, I mean, if you go back to the Islamic teaching, it does help you to sort of not be, to be flexible enough, because as Muslims, we don't judge other people. I mean, how are we going to encourage people to come to Islam if we're going to sit on judgment about who they are? But on the other hand, we don't necessarily have to. It's the behaviour of people that we don't accept, not the actual person. I think that's probably, you see, maybe in some Muslim countries, or other, in a lot of countries, you hear about wars and conflicts and so forth. So over there, you can see what your enemy is, who your enemy is. In a country like New Zealand, we have those invisible enemies: apathy, materialism, all of those little things that you can't see but are there. And maybe that's sort of where things can be a little complicated. We can be very materialistic here. It's all about upgrading your phone, upgrading your car, So it's all around that, as opposed So that's probably what we have to deal with in New Zealand. But in terms of being Muslim in New Zealand, it's certainly infinitely simpler here than maybe in some other parts of the world. Okay, what do I think Islam can offer people? As it is done with my life, it can offer people an alternative, a much more simpler way of living, much more peaceful way of living, a place where you feel there is order. In a world full of chaos, we need some kind of order. And this is what Islam does. It gives you a routine, but also it gives you a sense of purpose and a hope. One of the things I learned was Islam is a complete way of life. It's not just a religion, it's not a political entity. It does cover them, but it's a complete way of life. From the time that you get up in the morning to the time that you go to bed at night. It's a very healthy way of living, a very clean way of living. And in terms of how it has changed my life, it's made me think in a very different, I have a very different way of thinking now, maybe say to what I had back in 2015. And I have to take my hat off to the brother who was helping me through, the basics of Islam at the time. Because at the time, I guess I was very broadly Kiwi. So there were certain etiquettes that I wasn't aware of. And he was very patient with me through that time. Because there were times I would forget, obviously, something, and he would just take me back, and it was very helpful. But once I learned those basic principles, and it's something I always go back to, it's the basic principles that I learned. It's helped me in terms of refining my life to a much more simple way of living, a basic way of living. I think, in Western society, we tend to live very complicated lives. We fill our house full of things, breakable things, and as I learned in the earthquake, things you lose very quickly. But having been able to visit a lot of countries, like places like Fiji, for instance, where they have cyclones on frequent occasion and basically lose everything. So they live very simple lives, and I have to respect that. And so it's taught me to just go back to those very basics, a very basic, simple way of life. For people certainly searching for answers, keep asking the question. Keep at it. Don't think, well, I haven't heard the answer, so I'm just going to give up on it. And sometimes, even if it's not the answer you want to hear, it doesn't mean it's not the answer. And so it's a case of just keep pursuing that and don't give up. And for people who have been in say, similar situations to myself, where you have a family who doesn't want to have anything to do with you, again, don't let that get you down. Because even though your earthly family, you might say, doesn't maybe want to have a bar of you at this time, doesn't mean that they won't change. But secondly, you have also inherited a global family, because Islam is not just a localized religion or people, it's a global people. And this is something I learned on Hajj. There were something like 4 or 5 million people, and it didn't feel like even though I couldn't speak all of their languages, just a simple greeting and they would respond, you felt good. You felt like you actually did know these people, even though you probably would never see them again. You felt a real family feeling that, you know, you didn't feel out of place with any of them? Okay, yeah, no, I won't. Look, my Hajj experience, I said to cut it very short, I said to a brother, I could go on many more Hajjs, but I will always remember the first one. Why? Because it's the first time I saw the Qibla. It was the first time I had done tawaf and sa'i and all of these things, and these are things I will remember. And also, anyone who says that Hajj is complicated is wrong. Once you understand what you're doing, then it is incredibly simple. And also, one thing I say to people is, take sunglasses. I didn't, and realized that I should have. But okay, all jokes aside, look, my Hajj experience was something, again, that is a change of life. You can, if you go on Hajj with the right motivation, the right intention, and you allow, because the invitation is not from anyone. Look, there are rich people who can't even go on Hajj. The invitation comes from Allah Himself. And when you accept that invitation and you go and you allow Him into your heart while you're there, it completely turns your life upside down in a positive way. Well, as I said, for somebody who is learning about Islam, you have to be very patient and very easy. I'll give you an example, very briefly. There was a young man who came to the masjid. He wanted to learn about Islam. He was only 17 years old. And he spoke to a brother. And he admitted he had trouble with smoking. Now, I can appreciate that because I also had that trouble. I used to smoke like a chimney. But this brother obviously had very strong viewpoints and came down very hard on this young man, and said it's haram and it's this and it's that. And I said to this brother afterwards, this young man's never going to come back to the mosque again. He said, why? I said, because you didn't encourage him in a positive way. You just automatically, he doesn't understand what a word like haram means. It took me I had to ask what it meant. So it's important to be patient. Sometimes it can take a long time for somebody to even get some very fundamental basics. But it is always worth that patience in the end.